and Linda had been married for 32 years. They had built a life together filled with love, compromise, and shared dreams. Now in their early 50s, they were looking forward to retirement, traveling, spending time with their grandchildren, and enjoying the quiet comfort of growing old together. But life had other plans. One autumn morning, Linda noticed that Mark had lost weight. His usual hearty appetite had diminished, and he often seemed tired. At first, she dismissed it as work stress. Mark had spent decades as an architect, pouring himself into his projects. But when he started having persistent stomach pains, she insisted he see a doctor. Mark was reluctant. Like many men, he hated hospitals and avoided doctors unless absolutely necessary. But Linda was persistent. "We're not young anymore, Mark. You need to take care of yourself," she urged. After weeks of tests and uncertainty, the doctor finally gave them the news that changed everything. Mark had pancreatic cancer. The moment they heard the word cancer, the world seemed to freeze. Linda felt her breath catch, and Mark just sat there, his hands clenched into fists. "Are you sure?" Mark asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The doctor nodded solemnly. "We caught it early, but it's aggressive. We need to start treatment immediately." That night, Mark and Linda sat in their living room surrounded by the familiar warmth of their home. The walls were filled with pictures of their life together, vacations, family gatherings, and small happy moments frozen in time. Now, those pictures seemed to belong to another world, one untouched by the reality of illness. Mark exhaled heavily. "I don't want to do this, Linda. The chemo, the hospital visits. I don't want our life to become about this." Linda reached for his hand. "Mark, we'll face this together. We always have." He looked at her, his eyes filled with fear. "What if I don't make it?" She squeezed his hand tightly. "Then we'll fight with everything we have, one day at a time." Cancer wasn't just a physical battle. It was an emotional and financial one. Mark's insurance covered some of the treatment, but the costs quickly added up. Linda, who had recently retired from teaching, found herself handling paperwork, insurance calls, and endless medical bills. But the hardest part wasn't the money. It was watching the man she loved suffer. Chemo drained Mark's strength. He, once so full of life, now spent days in bed, exhausted and in pain. His thick hair thinned, his skin became pale, and his once muscular frame grew frail. Linda did her best to care for him, making him soups, helping him bathe, holding his hand during the worst of the treatments. But it wasn't easy. Mark became irritable. The man who had once made her laugh with his terrible dad jokes now barely spoke. Some days, he snapped at her over the smallest things. One evening, after another grueling day at the hospital, Mark lashed out. "I hate this, Linda. I hate feeling like a burden to you." Linda, exhausted and heartbroken, finally broke. "And you think I enjoy watching you suffer? You think I want to see you in pain?" Tears streamed down her face. "Mark, I love you. I'd do anything to take this away, but I can't. So let me be here for you." Mark's anger melted into sorrow. He reached for her, his voice cracking. "I'm sorry. I'm scared." She held him tightly. "Me too." One evening, Mark and Linda sat outside on their porch, watching the sunset. The sky was a mixture of orange and deep purple, and for the first time in months, Mark smiled. "I've spent so much time being angry. he admitted. But sitting here with you, I realize I'm lucky, not because of this illness, but because I have you. Linda blinked back tears. Always. They started cherishing small moments, watching their favorite old movies, reminiscing about their early days together, and even laughing about the things they once argued over. One night, as they lay in bed, Mark turned to her. Promise me something. Linda nodded. If the worst happens, don't stop living. Travel, laugh, love our grandkids the way we always planned. Linda swallowed hard. Don't talk like that. I need to say it. He touched her cheek. You've always been my strongest supporter, but you need to promise me that when I can't fight anymore, you'll keep going. Tears slid down her face, but she nodded. I promise. Months passed, and Mark's condition worsened. He had good days and bad days, but through it all, Linda stayed by his side. One afternoon, as he rested, their granddaughter Emma visited. She climbed onto the bed beside him, her small hand in his. Grandpa, when you get better, can we go to the park again? She asked, her eyes full of innocence. Mark smiled weakly. I'd like that, sweetheart. Linda watched them, her heart aching. That night, as she sat beside him, he whispered, Thank you for loving me, even when it was hard. She kissed his forehead. It was never hard, Mark. Loving you has been the easiest thing I've ever done. Mark fought for as long as he could. When the time came, Linda held his hand until his last breath. In the months that followed, she honored his wish. She traveled, surrounded herself with family, and carried his love with her through every new day. Because love, real love, doesn't end with loss. It lives on in every memory, every promise kept, and every moment shared. And that, Linda knew, was the greatest gift of all. As the seasons changed, so did Linda's grief. At first, the house felt unbearably empty. The silence was deafening, the absence of Mark's voice a constant ache in her heart. She found herself setting 2 plates at the dinner table out of habit, only to realize she was alone. But slowly she learned to live with the loss, not by forgetting, but by carrying Mark's love with her in everything she did. She started writing letters to him in a journal, telling him about her days, about the silly things their grandchildren did, and how much she missed his laughter. She visited the park where they used to walk, sitting on their favorite bench, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face, as if Mark was still beside her. One evening, as she looked through an old photo album, she found a letter Mark had written before he passed. His familiar handwriting brought fresh tears to her eyes. My love, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer with you. But please know, I'm never truly gone. I am in the sunrise that greets you every morning, in the laughter of our grandchildren, in the wind that brushes against your cheek. You gave me a life full of love, and I want you to keep living. Go see the places we dreamed of. Dance in the rain. Laugh until your stomach hurts. And when your heart aches, remember that my love for you is eternal. Always yours, Mark. Linda pressed the letter to her chest, tears streaming down her face. That night, for the first time in months, she stepped outside, looking up at the vast sky. The stars twinkled above, and she whispered, I love you, Mark. I always will. And in that quiet moment, she felt him, his love, his presence, wrapped around her like a warm embrace, reminding her that true love never fades. It simply changes form, living on in the hearts of those who keep it alive.